Hey everyone, Cool Caparoon here. Today I'm going to show you how I turned this photo into this photo. I'm going to walk you through every bit of my process, tell you what camera, lenses I used, how I lit it, and everything else. Let's get into it. So this is my favorite photo I've ever taken of my studio. For those of you that don't follow the music channel, I'm a music producer and a mix engineer in Nashville, Tennessee. This channel is dedicated more to the photo video side of what I do. So subscribe if you haven't yet, but we're gonna take a look at how I did this. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna click on this right here, and I've duplicated these so that way I can do the process over for you. So what I've done is I have shot this in 3 different exposures. Let's look at some info here. So I shot this on my Sony a7 IV with the 14mm f1.8 G Master. It was at f1.8 ISO 100. And on this first one, the shutter speed was 1.6 seconds. So we got a very bright image here to make sure that there's plenty of exposure everywhere. Then I took another photo that is much darker. It was shutter speed 1/3 of a second. And then I took, you can see that the lights up here and the screen is still blown out from this. So then I took another one to properly expose for the lights and the screen, and this was at 1/13 of a second. Now, what's really important that you do this on a tripod. It doesn't really matter what camera you're using, as long as you're shooting in RAW, that's the most important thing. And then in these sort of environments that are really hard scenes to shoot, I really like taking multiple exposures so that way we can merge them and get much better lighting. So what we're going to do is we're going to select one of the darkest ones, one of the middle ones, and one of the brightest ones by holding down Command, and then we are going to go into Photo Merge, HDR Merge. So then it's going to create a preview for us here, and as soon as it's done, it will show us what it thinks that it should be. And you can see that while the overall image is much warmer, you can see how much more evenly lit everything is. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to merge that. And then once it's done merging, we're going to be able to start from that. There we go. And we are going to edit this photo. Now, the first thing that I'm going to want to do here is kind of correct the color temperature. And I'm going to do this by eye because there's not any white in here. Normally you could click on this eyedropper and click some white, but there is no white in here and there's no gray. So I'm going to kind of do this by eye. I'm literally sitting in the room based on what I know it looks like. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to lower the exposure back down because that is far too bright. And then what I'd like to do, let's go ahead and straighten it just a little bit, and we're going to go ahead and crop this in a 16:9. And I think something like that. I want this upper 1/3 line to line up with the soffit up here, and then we're going to do that. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start creating a ton of masks. The first thing I'm going to do is create a bunch of masks on the speakers, and so we're going to create a mask, and I'm just going to highlight all the speakers, drag a box around every single one of them, and hopefully it gets all of them without having to do a bunch of extra work here. Yep, and that speaker right there, and this speaker right here. A lot of people, when they see a photo like this, they just, first of all, half the reactions are, how is that real? That doesn't look like a real place. It looks like a 3D render. Well, this is part of the reason why. So we're gonna highlight all of these speakers here. And then once that is done, there we go. So now all of these speakers are on the same mask. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is create some exposure on them. So we're going to pull them up, but you can see that they get real faded. So what I like to do is pull the exposure up a little bit. We're going to pull the highlights way up, and then we're going to hit it with some contrast here. And maybe we're going to pull the shadows up too and hit it with some contrast. And now they're getting a little bit too warm, so we're going to make them a little colder and turn the saturation down a little bit because we don't want that red to pop too hard. Let's pull the blacks down on these. Now maybe we'll just do that with the shadows. The blacks is a bit too deep. Exposure up, shadows down, exposure up, shadows down. So somewhere about there. Yes, That's looking pretty good. So before, after, that is looking much, much better. The next thing that I want to do is all this distracting stuff right here where you can see the back of the racks. I don't like that. So we're going to create a new mask, and we're going to do a linear gradient, and we're just going to pull it up like so. I'm real big on, you want the photo to draw the eye. Like you want to control where people look. And what I'd like them to look at is the center of the frame first, and then all of the speakers second. That's what and then the environment third. That's what I really want people to look at. I don't want people distracted by this. Since this is the closest part, it's not doing anything. So we're gonna lower exposure of that right there, just so that way people don't really pay as much attention to it. That's pretty good. All right, the next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna create another mask, and we are going to mask off these rocks right here, like this, and like this. And what we want to do is create more contrast and warm that up a little bit and saturate it a little bit. It's a little too green, so we're going to turn it a little bit more magenta, like that. Very good. So let's create a couple more masks here. The next mask we're going to do is with the computer screen, because you can see it is far too blue, and that does not look good. So we're going to mask the whole computer screen. We're going to come down here and warm it up. We're also going to reduce the exposure, take the highlights down a little bit and the shadows up a little bit. Now the color temperature looks good, but it's a little too green. So we're going to shift this a little magenta, somewhere about in there. And sometimes one of the coolest things to do is crank the saturation, and you can see that that's still pretty blue. So if we keep pushing it like this, and it's still a little green. So if you keep pushing the temperature and the tint around with the exposure cranked, then it's a little bit easier to see what the problem is. So when we reset the exposure, now that looks kind of how it looks in real life. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create another object, another mask, and we're going to just mask the hardware here like that. And we're going to just bring some of the shadows up and some of the exposure up just a little bit, like so. Then we're going to contrast a little bit. We're going to add some texture to that. Let's go back to these rocks up here. We want to add texture to the rocks, and we want to add a little bit of sharpness to the rocks. And you can see how our mask is cut off here. So now that we're this low, or this zoomed in, we're going to add stuff, add objects to this mask, and we are going to get all of this stone put into this mask right here. There we go. And then we're also going to do the same over here. We're going to get all of that put in that mask. All right. Now, let's zoom back out a little bit. Now what we want to do is, or what I'm going to do is, I want to bring some of the blacks up a little bit with the tone curve here, and then pull some of the shadows down and push some of the highlights back up. So that just gives it kind of a little bit more like faded filmic look almost. The next thing that we are going to do here is we're going to get some vignette into here, because I don't want all of this blank space up here. I don't want people's eyes drawn to this. This is not what we want people to look at. So we're going to pull the midpoint in, and we're going to feather this way out, and something like that. That's looking pretty good. Again, before, after. And then what I want to do is start pushing in some exposure in the mids. So this is your shadows, mids, midtones, and highlights. And I find that you can get a photo to pop, really pop, when you push the luminance of the midtones up. So just watch this. So it goes from that, and as you push it up, it just really pops, like a lot. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is maybe push some texture, a little bit of texture into this. These speakers are still looking a little bit faded, so let's go back to our speaker mask and let's go into some dehaze. Yeah, there we go. So now they are not quite as faded. We're going to add texture and sharpness, maybe a little bit less dehaze, like that. Let's add some warmth to the highlights. So bring the hue over here to somewhere around there. And something like that. And then we're going to bring in some teals or some blues into the shadows, but just a touch. Yeah, just like that. Let's experiment with the highlights and shadows a little bit more. And with the exposure, like that. And then I think let's work on this crop, because I don't feel like we're centered. We're not. See how much more space is over here than over here? So we want that to be perfectly centered, like so. And then I think if we just go up to about the top of the cloud there, maybe just below the top of the cloud. Now we've got some, it's a little bit warped here, so we're gonna go into our distortion. Let's go like that, and then horizontal. We're gonna pull it that way, just the tiniest bit. Adjust the crop so that way there's no white in there. Now see how this line on the ceiling cloud is much more even? That's a pretty shocking difference. Add just a little bit of contrast in here, and that is looking pretty good. That's the before, that's the after. If you ever thought these photos just get snapped right out of camera, you would be wrong. Pull some saturation, some yellow out a little bit. Let's push some orange up just a little bit and some red. Let's pull the luminosity of the red down so you can see how it's changing the brightness of the red in the speakers. Let's pull that down. I like that a lot better. Play around with the vignette a little bit more. And then let's go back to the mask on our speakers, and let's just pull the highlights down a little bit and raise the overall exposure. I want the speakers like as bright as they can be without like looking crazy edited. I think we'll call that before and after. And that is how I would edit one of my favorite interior shots I've ever taken, one of my favorite studio shots I've ever taken. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of this. What I want you to take away from this is that as long as you're shooting with a camera that'll shoot RAW, and your iPhone will shoot RAW too. You can flip your phone over into 48 megapixel RAW. And as long as you are careful and you have it on a tripod and you use a shot timer, I set this to a 2-second delay so that way there's no shake from me hitting it with such a slow shutter speed. As long as you're doing that, you can make incredible looking photos of anywhere that you are, as long as you know how to edit it, as long as you're shooting in RAW. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Thanks guys for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.